Why do we avoid conversations about DEI? Well, there are a lot of reasons. I've got 12 here. The first is we position it as a cause, just like every other cause that we have, right? So it's temporary. When it's a cause, it's like, hey, we're doing this, we're raising awareness for this. And it's, everyone does it because it's a cause, it makes us feel good, it's part of our obligation, so we throw money at it, and we say some nice words about it, sentiments, and then we move on, right? We do that maybe on a quarterly basis or twice a year. Second thing is why we avoid conversations about it is because we don't give people permission to tie it to money, revenue, return on investment. Because those people who do that, we often associate them with being exploitative. Like, no, DEI is about giving people equal representation, equitability, making sure that there's representation across different groups. A third reason why we avoid conversations about it is because we only make it about the three categories. We say when we think diversity, equity, inclusion, immediately we think, okay, it's about race, ethnicity, gender, and sexual orientation. Okay, it's about those things and more. So the fourth thing why we avoid conversations about DEI is because we're conditioned to not acknowledge differences. And because if we do see it, then we're racist, we're xenophobic, and we're discriminating. But in effect, by us not doing it, we're not able to actually alleviate, we're not able to actually acknowledge and bring to light the stories and the stereotypes and the biases that we carry because we're just trying to negate them. The fifth reason that we don't, of why we avoid conversations about DEI is because we use a lot of complex jargon and statements and things like phrases that we hear and they sound so academic, they sound brilliant, but in the workplace, they don't work for everyone, right? The jargon that we hear in academia doesn't always transfer well into the workplace, into the workforce. In terms of inclusion, I would say the other part of it, or my other definition of inclusion, is making sure that everyone's voice is heard. Not just one group that is the underrepresented group, and not just the dominant group, but everyone's voice. Because if we just invite the underrepresented group solely, right, then we're actually we're undermining our efforts in being inclusive. So we're excluding some people in our effort to be inclusive, which wouldn't make sense. So I think that's just reasons why we avoid conversations about DEI. The seventh is that I think that companies have such an they have an opportunity to really drive these DEI conversations because it's one of the only spaces, if you think about, that can bring people, that invite all backgrounds, experiences, diversity backgrounds, and they're all together as adults in one space, right? That's like one of the few places where you have that opportunity. And so I think, going based on that point, why do we avoid conversations about it? I think it's because organizations or companies specifically don't realize the potential they have to really influence their industry, to really be the driver of DEI within their industry or cross industries. And the assumption is that, well, there are all these other companies that are doing it better and well, so, we can't, as an organization, we can't be innovative and do it a better way. There are all these companies that are doing it better than us. The eighth reason why we avoid conversations about it is that the assumption is that there's only one way, the right way. Meaning, people who are driving these conversations or who are engaging in these conversations assume or make the assumption or suggest or illustrate that there's only one way to think about diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's the right way. The ninth reason why we avoid conversations about DEI is because we have this pressure to fix things. Like, we've got to fix DEI for our company. We've got to do it in by tomorrow. That's a lot of pressure to put on anyone and everyone. That's a whole lot of pressure. My next point. We avoid conversations about this because we don't like to feel comfort. We don't want to feel discomfort. But let me ask you this. When was the last time any of us felt 100% comfortable in our jobs, in our careers? The whole point of growth is feeling discomfort. Another reason why people don't engage, or organizations and companies don't engage in DEI conversations, is because sometimes if an organization is a global company or global organization, there's so many layers. There are multiple layers in terms of how we define diversity categories, right? There's so many more layers. It just feels like a lot of work. The 12th reason that we avoid conversations about DEI is because, again, similarly to companies that are global, some other companies are going through mergers and acquisitions. So they're dealing with, integrating people, integrating teams. So the DEI conversation seems like less of a priority because the priority is just getting everyone on the same page. But what I want to point out to you is that the same process that you're using within to integrate the teams, the same logic, the same mindset, the same beliefs, the same structure that you're using to integrate all these different business units and teams is the same thing you're using to perpetuate DEI. And then the 13th reason is that we don't talk about DEI is because it's so personal to us. It can be so personal to us. We've either been the subject of discrimination or xenophobia or racism. We've been accused of it, and it brings up a lot of emotion. We've seen it. It's embedded in our DNA and our psyche from what we experienced years ago, and we carry that. And so we don't want to bring up those feelings again, or we don't want to be accused of anything again, right? But the thing about it is, if we refrain from talking about it, we refrain from sharing our stories with each other or hearing other people's stories, we miss out on the fact that we're actually more similar than we are different. We actually, many of us have had similar experiences across different diversity attributes. And so even though we're different and we celebrate how we're unique and different, we're actually starting to identify the parallels in our journeys around DEI.